The Dogman may be one of the most outlandish and unlikely creatures to step foot out of our forests. But if these monsters really do exist, and the eyewitness accounts are true, can we still call the forests ours? We'll be talking about that and much more on this episode of Paranormal Mysteries.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7, 8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Nick Ryan, and joining me is my wife, Nicole, and this is episode 24. Thanks for joining me on the episode.
Hello.
So today we're just going to be doing a little bit different style than what we normally do, and we're just going to be talking about some theories that other people have that I've read about, and some theories that we have come up with about what the Dogman really might be, and we're going to just kind of go from there. You told me a couple things. You really didn't know much about this until I started researching it. Why don't we start by you telling our listeners how you feel about the paranormal in general? Kind of, are you a skeptic? Are you a believer? Are you a little bit of both? I'll let you kind of take the floor with that.
I believe because anything is possible, and people have seen things. Honest people that you can believe their stories because they never lie. They tell the truth. They're always there for you. They're good people. And they just can't explain it. They know what they saw. They're not making it up. I personally haven't seen anything, but I know that things do exist. I know my cousins and my aunts have witnessed some ghosts in an old farmhouse in Michigan. A bunch of people have passed, Uncle Joe and Grandma, and when Uncle Joe passed, I wasn't here to witness it, but everybody was in the kitchen. And in this house, the front door led right into the kitchen. So everyone's at the table, eating and talking, and all of a sudden, the front door, which is completely locked, or completely shut, opens fully, closes fully. And then the next thing you know, the door that goes up to upstairs to the bedroom, that opens completely and then shuts completely. About 5 minutes later, the same thing happens in reverse. The door that goes upstairs opens and closes, and then the front door opens and closes. And this is right after Uncle Joe had passed. The next thing in this house, she came downstairs into the kitchen, and every single drawer, every single cupboard door was open. And it was very strange, and I think this was after Grandma had passed.
So in general, not necessarily just talking about Dogman or werewolves or whatever, but in general, you feel like paranormal-wise, you're a believer that things are possible.
Definitely.
And, okay, I just kind of wanted to give everybody an idea, since back in the episode of the Mandela Effect, I had you on with me, and we were talking about stuff. I don't really think we got into things very, very deep about kind of what your belief system is, but would you say you're also a skeptic as well? I mean, you're not just going to believe an average Joe's story off the street, but without doing some research.
Right.
Okay. So, yeah, those are some pretty cool stories that you've got from your family, but you yourself have never, I think you're kind of like me in the respect that you've never actually seen anything real groundbreaking, like firsthand, right?
No, there were some pictures that I have taken where I've seen orbs in them.
Okay.
Different shapes. Pictures of grandparents, like blowing out candles and stuff.
Yeah.
And afterward, I see pictures, and there's just definite spots in them that you can't explain. It doesn't look. It's not a floaty. It's not. Anyway, it was very unique and weird. I didn't see it when I was taking the picture, so that's the only thing that I've witnessed.
Yeah, personally seen that could be something. So today, guys, we just kind of wanted to give you kind of some insight, because Nicole will be joining me on future episodes here and there. We're going to be changing up our format just a slight bit. So today, I've come up with a list of some theories, I should say, that people have as to why the Dogman exists, or what it is, or what people think it might be. And we're just going to go down that list and just kind of talk about it. So first thing on the list is the Dogman being some sort of alien. So, and then after we go through this list, I think then we'll touch on, it might be a good time to touch on what we actually, think it might be, where it comes from, all that. So anyway, so alien, I'll let you go first. Do you think, what do you think about that idea? And being an alien being from some other planet?
It's possible. Like I said, I don't know much about them. I've never seen them. But I do believe aliens exist because people see them all the time. Like with Bigfoot, a lot of the time, glowing orbs or lights are also seen in the forest when they are there. But I don't know about Dogmen. I'm not sure if those orbs are seen or not. There was one story that you said about a sheriff who was hunting, and then he saw, in Texas, and he saw 2 dogmen walking below him because he was up in a tree stand. They were just walking side by side. I don't remember if he saw lights or anything, but I think he said he's never been hunting since. That was pretty unique, pretty weird. But an alien, I don't know. I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I think it's not. I guess I'll put it this way: it's not the first thing I go to.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the first thing.
Yeah.
But if there's different universes, different dimensions, who's to say aliens aren't using that dimension?
In general, with this particular topic, it's hard for me to come up with any sort of conclusion, and I think we'll say right off the bat that neither one of us have any sort of conclusion as to what this is. We're just kind of really, really speculating here, based on not even first-hand encounters, but also, I mean, really, it's based on people that we either know or stories that we've heard from people, like you were saying, that are known to be truthful. The next one is one that I think might be the biggest cause for a lot of sightings, and I'm not saying that this is all of the sightings, because I do believe that people are seeing something that is unexplainable in the forest. The next one is bear misidentification. So I did a little bit of research on what are some of the standard sizes of grizzly bears, what are some of the world records for the largest grizzly bears ever shot, ever captured, because it seems like a lot of times when you hear skeptics talk about this subject, and you'll hear them say this about Bigfoot encounters too. They'll say, well, they're seeing a bear. They're seeing a bear that's standing up on its hind legs, and and that's kind of like their default, go-to explanation for it. But then if you really want to think logically about this, bears don't run on their hind legs, and there's a lot of weird things that just can't be explained. So it's that explanation for me is kind of, it doesn't work. So, but anyway, I was just going to say here real quick, I'll give you some specs that I found. Grizzly bears can average approximately 7 feet tall when standing up, and they can weigh up to about 800 pounds.
What is the smallest amount, like when they're starving or when they're hungry? What is the skinniest? What's the smallest?
What's the smallest average? I did not look that up, because typically these Dogman reports almost exclusively say that these things are about 8 feet in height. On average, it seems like on the taller end of the spectrum, 7 feet is kind of at that edge, and about 800 pounds is kind of what a lot of research has shown that they kind of max out at. I did read that one of the largest grizzly bears ever recorded was found in Alaska, and it weighed in at about 1,200 pounds, and it stood about 10 feet tall when it raised up. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So for me, that kind of reinforces my belief that some of these sightings are probably bear sightings. Maybe at a distance, maybe, you're in a moving car. There's a lot of different variables that could go into why people are seeing a bear and they think that it's something else. Grizzly bears have a pretty long snout. Now, they don't necessarily, I wouldn't say they look like a dog or, an upright canine, but
maybe
what do you think?
If they're hungry, if they're starving, they will look skinnier. They wouldn't be as large, and therefore their head wouldn't be as big, so therefore it could be even more pronounced skinny-wise if it's, the dry season or something and they're searching for food. But, I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, anything's possible. The eye likes to play games. So sometimes you think you see something and two people could see the same thing and say it's something completely different. Perspective.
Right.
But there's also people who know exactly what they've seen. Like, they pay attention to the details. So, I mean, if you're driving by and you just get a glimpse of it, then yeah, totally, it could be, it could possibly be a bear. Who knows? But
Right. And a lot of these sightings are made by people that are used to being outdoors. They're people that maybe they're hunters, maybe they're people they're used to being out there in the wilderness. So they're people that you would imagine that they would know what they're looking at. Even if a bear had mange, or like you said, maybe it was a little bit leaner because it wasn't finding enough food or something like that. There's such a drastic difference in the way that a dogman is claimed to look than even the strangest looking bear. The only similarity would be that it would be standing up on its hind legs.
And it's hairy.
Right. And now the other thing is that, there's a lot of sightings where people, they don't necessarily see movement. They'll say they see the eye shine, of something that was 7 or 8 feet tall. They say they don't really think it was a bear because maybe the eyes were too far apart or too close together to be what they, in their mind, would be a bear. But they didn't really see the body. They just saw a black shadow that was massive. And I think in those scenarios, it's possible. Now, granted, without being there, it's really hard to know, but I think it's possible that something like that could be a bear.
And you could go by feeling, too. If you feel the dread, or if you feel like, oh, I'm scared, but I don't feel dread, like a different kind of energy.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of people really do seem to feel it's like an unnatural sense of fear that you don't typically have. There's a fear that you have, if you see a bear and you're like, oh man, I hope it doesn't come this way.
You can feel scared, but you don't feel like dread and yeah. Right.
You don't feel that primal sense of, I'm looking at something that is an apex predator. You might want to get out of there.
The fight or flight might come in with a regular bear, but you don't have the rush of, like, what is that called? Like when you turn a ghost.
You just feel all the blood kind of rush out of your head.
Yeah.
You turn kind of white.
Dread.
White as a ghost. And so I think bear misidentification could be a small part of it, but I'm definitely not trying to take away from people that are definitely seeing something. So next on the list, I've heard this. This is probably makes up for the smallest amount of theories on this, but some people think that it might be a demon or some sort of malevolent entity. That it's not actually a flesh and blood creature, but something that is more demonic. I don't know if you have a thought on that, or I have a couple, but I'll let you.
Well, like I said, I mean, anything would be possible. If you feel dread when it's around, then it could be demonic, or it could be just something from a different... I mean, it's possible.
My take on it, as far as it being something demonic, and again, I haven't seen it personally, if it is something that is a demon or something negative, it seems to show itself to people in weird ways. Like in episode 23, guy saw something running across a field. It didn't seem to have any sort of interest in him, and it it was just running from right to left, I believe, and it was chasing something else. And so I just kind of feel like if it was something demonic, I would guess that it might be more in tune to what the witnesses are doing, and it would be approaching them. I mean, maybe not. I don't really know why I'm thinking that, but I just kind of feel like demons show themselves to certain people for certain reasons.
And if it was chasing something, it was probably chasing it for food.
Right. So, anyway, I don't know. But on the list next is Skinwalker, and we'll kind of get through these next ones a little quicker. But the Skinwalker, of course, is essentially a Navajo legend, deeply rooted in the culture. A Skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. So not necessarily just a wolf or a wolf-like creature, but really in the culture, it's anything. They could disguise themselves as anything. That could also be kind of a similar aspect of like a shapeshifter in a way. So I think, personally, I think that might be a possibility, but with the Dogman creatures, it seems like it's very, very rare that people actually see any sort of change happening. It's always looking in one particular way. The only change that might happen is they might see it standing on four legs, and then it will raise itself up on its hind legs.
Okay.
So that might be, that could definitely be something, based on that. But and then the other one that I've heard, there's been a lot of military people that have come forward saying that the Dogman is some sort of lab experiment or possibly a super soldier kind of experiment that has either backfired, something like that. I don't know. Again, it's all speculation. It is
speculation, but it's possible. People say that about Sasquatch too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's some sort of like genetically modified lab creature.
But these things have been seen throughout history, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the military hasn't always had this technology.
Right. And then, of course, the last big one has to do more with the werewolf, which, again, kind of crosses that line between Skinwalker and Shapeshifter. The werewolf is something that has the ability to shapeshift into a wolf, either by its own will or because it had some sort of curse placed on it and it doesn't have the actual control of when it happens. It just, automatically will change. Again, no one really sees this creature changing or shape-shifting, so, who knows. But there is a lot. I mean, out of all these different theories, the Skinwalker and the werewolf would be the two closest and the two most prevalent theories, because there's so much information throughout history about these creatures, especially werewolves. Mm-hmm. And as crazy as the idea might sound, it's heavily rooted in cultures. It's primarily a European legend, but it is all over the world, really. The last thing, kind of an idea I had, which we've briefly touched on, is I think that last night when we were listening to an episode of Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott, which is awesome podcast that you guys should check out, they were talking about time slips. And I was wondering if it's not so much a time slip in this case, but maybe more of like a dimension slip. I just kind of made up that term, but like if there really are these overlapping dimensions or portals or whatever you want to believe they are that are all around us, then who's to say that these things aren't just traveling
in their own world,
and we're just seeing them as they're moving about, if that makes sense. It's overlapping bubbles of different dimensions that
intermix every now and then, and
right.
That's when we see them,
right? And because a lot of the stories you hear people seeing them, but not necessarily having physical contact with them. And it's very rare that you get somebody that actually claims that they have shot at one or or been able to, have any sort of interaction. They always seem like they're moving from one place to another. They might stare at you, but they never seem to make contact. Now, I have heard of stories. I've never really been able to, I've never been able to really validate the stories of people having horrible encounters with them where they were attacked. I've heard of people talking about this, but I've never been able to find and validate those stories. Typically, it's like in last episode, the sheriff that goes out into this rural area and he sees one. It was apparently scratching on this RV or trailer, mobile home, and there's claw marks and stuff. But other than that, he never gets an actual physical
look at it.
Well, he does. He looks at it, but there's no physical contact with it. He shines his light on it. He says that his flashlight is almost absorbed by the blackness of this thing. But he said the thing never turned and looked at him. It was like it didn't even care that he was there. So anyway, I'm just curious as if there is some sort of overlap between dimensions once in a while, and that's why people are getting a look at this thing. Mm-hmm. It did talk about this one story where these multiple things, I think this was in New York State, some guys were camping. They saw some lights in the sky, what they thought were maybe like a meteor or something coming down to Earth. And a few minutes after that, they ended up heading to bed. And in the middle of the night, one of their buddies woke them up because he saw things standing just on the outside of the firelight at the edge of the forest, like watching.
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
Yeah, and those would run up, and they were tugging on the tent. So those were actually making physical contact with the tent. So those ones did seem to be a physical entity of some sort. I think if I had to choose a theory as to what these things are, I think they're not something that's necessarily native to what we know as Earth. It's something that is, I think, part of a dimension that is here, that we can't see all the time, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll go back to the sheriff in Texas who was up in a tree blind, and he saw the two dogmen walking, or they look like dogmen, walking side by side. Who's to say in their dimension, they're dogs and they walk upright, and that maybe we are in their dimension, but maybe we are their pets. Maybe, we walk on all fours. Who's to say anything, honestly? Kind
of like everything is backwards in their dimension from what we know in ours.
Yeah, I mean, that's just speculation. Who knows? But it was just a thought that I had.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it seems like just about anything is possible. Mm-hmm. So, who knows?
And the Dogman kind of reminds me of Little Red Riding Hood. If that's a fable, that's a story. And stories usually happen because somebody witnessed something, and therefore it comes about as a story or a fable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some grain of truth somewhere down the line.
Exactly.
That turns into something bigger. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting theory. As far as we're concerned, it's definitely still one of the biggest mysteries that I've ever heard about. And this isn't going to be the last episode that I do on the Dogman, but I just wanted to do a few episodes and get the ball rolling, and we'll come back to this eventually as we get more stories and we go from there. So I appreciate you being here and kind of sharing your input with me today. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
But if any of you have any ideas or theories or stories that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to do so. We will share them here on the show. And you can send those stories to paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit paranormal-mysteries.com to do that. You can also get involved by joining our forum and by following us on social media at paramysterypod. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can visit us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries. You can also support the show by giving us a positive review over on iTunes. And while you're there, we'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe and share it with your friends. That helps us out quite a bit as well. New episodes of the show are available on all of your favorite podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher. I would also like to remind our listeners that there are a lot of wonderful podcasters out there. One of my favorites, as I mentioned before, is Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. They do a wonderful job. They cover many different topics. And if you like our show, you're going to love their show as well. So definitely check them out and give them a follow. And as we close out tonight's episode, I'm going to leave you once again with Steve Cook's The Legend. From all of us at Paranormal Mysteries, thanks for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.
Summer morning in early June is when the legend began. At a nameless logging camp in Wexford County where the Manistee River ran. 11 lumberjacks near the Garland Swamp found an animal they thought was a dog. In a playful mood, they chased it around till it ran inside a hollow log. A logger named Johnson grabbed him a stick and poked around inside. Then the thing let out an unearthly scream and came out and stood upright. None of those men ever said very much about whatever happened then. They just packed up their belongings and left that night, were never heard from again. It was 10 years later in 97 when a farmer near Buckley was found. Slumped over his plow, his heart had stopped. There were dog tracks all around. 7 years past the turn of the century, they say a crazy old widow had a dream of dogs that circled her house at night. They walked like men and screamed. In 1917, a sheriff who was out a-walking found a driverless wagon and tracks in the dust like wolves had been a-stalking. Near the roadside, a 4-horse team lay dead with their eyes open wide. When the vet finished up his examination, he said it looked like they died of fright. In 37, a schooner captain said several crew members had reported a pack of wild dogs roaming Bowers Harbor. His story was never recorded. In 57, a man of the cloth found claw marks on an old church door. The newspaper said they'd been made by a dog. He'd had to stood 7'4". In 67, a van load of hippies told a park ranger named Quinlan they'd been awakened in the night by a scratch at the window. There was a dog man looking in and grinning. Then in the summer of 87, near Luther, it happened again. At a cabin in the woods, it looked like maybe someone had tried to break in. There were cuts around the doors could have only been made by very sharp teeth and claws. He didn't wear shoes because he didn't have feet. He walked on just 2 paws. Legends are born of stories told, imagination without restriction. But what does a legend become when the truth outruns the fiction? The decades come, the decades go, people still swear they see. Interlock and Reed City, Mackinac, there was something looking back at me. And somewhere in the Northwoods darkness, a creature walks upright. And the best advice you may ever get is don't go out at night.